Hey, good morning and happy holidays to everybody out there in Swuggaland. This video is going to be an interesting one because it's something that I don't normally do. I don't typically respond directly to other videos that have been made in the Star Wars Galaxy of Hero ecosphere, unless, of course, it is done completely in good fun. Scribe. But this one was brought to my attention last night. And I committed to sitting down and watching it this morning after talking to a few people on Discord. And listen, I'm in my I don't give a frack era, and yes, that was a Battlestar Galactica reference from the early 2000s. And what that essentially means is that even if it's going to burn me, even if I'm going to lose half of my fan base, even if everybody's going to be mad at me and walk up to my castle with pitchforks and fire, I don't care. The reality is that I hate half truths. I hate when people use data and statistics in a way that is misleading. And I really, really, really dislike when conclusions are drawn without a full picture. And what does that all mean? Well, oh, man, I don't know if we should do this before the intro or after the intro. I guess before. About 10 days ago, Arnold T posted a video involving the numbers for the new era coming to the game. And I took a listen to it this morning. I actually took a couple notes on it this morning and dropped some time stamps because I was going to do this the old scribe way. And I decided instead to encourage everybody to go watch that video. It is titled The Numbers Are In, and Swugga lost tons of players. But I will give you a TLDR of that after the intro, and I'm going to talk about why a lot of what is being talked about there is disingenuous with numbers to back it up, as well as some research into mobile gaming, if that is your kink. So with that said, I'll be right back in a moment. So Arnold posted this video again. I think it's 9 days ago. It's called "The Numbers Are In," and Swugga lost tons of players. And I do again implore you to go watch it, and it's about 15 minutes long. But to give you a TLDR on what he is talking about here, he is suggesting that there's been a massive drop off in the player base between the first Era Tune Stormtrooper Luke and the second Era Tune IG-90 of roughly 100,000 players. Now, he suggests that as if it has a lot to do with the era itself and how CG has mishandled the era. And you can kind of tell that throughout the video. One thing that he does say, and I am glad, I was actually very annoyed when I first heard about the video, but after listening, I am less annoyed just because he has brought up the fact that even though supposedly 100,000 players have been lost between Stormtrooper Luke and IG-90, but the player base is actually larger than it was before the eras overall, right? And that doesn't make sense without context. He doesn't really talk about that context at all. And I do want to talk about that. There is a huge suggestion that players are unhappy with Coliseum and the current era, and that is why 100,000 players came and went, probably a combination of new players and old players. But why is that? I will concede the point here that I do feel very negative on this era. I do feel very negative on Coliseum. There have been points in the last couple of weeks where I have wanted to quit the game. Right now, the Gungis are on pause because I just don't feel the joy that I felt last year when we were putting it together. And I am very aware of players who are veteran players who have left the game in this time because of the era itself. I'm not here to suggest that players haven't left the game because I fully agree that they have. But I want to talk about something else that happened towards the beginning of the era. If you remember, during the beginning of the era, we saw a huge advertising push by CG. We were seeing YouTube ads, we were seeing Instagram ads. These are things that we didn't really typically see very much at all, but CG was going all out for the 10-year anniversary to bring in new players, right? And that kind of explains to us why the numbers now are so much higher than they were before, even if we're looking at a 100,000 player drop off. And I want you to keep that advertising push in mind when we talk about that in just a minute. So let's look at the numbers in a less disingenuous way. And this is something that a lot of content creators are not really understanding. And I put these numbers together on Reddit for a completely different, well, I guess the same reason, but because of a completely different person. Now, when we look at Stormtrooper Luke, and this is Stormtrooper Luke today as of 49 minutes ago, there are 578,656 of them currently in the game, right? And that's a pretty considerable amount of characters. And we could go as far back as Captain Athano, which was all the way back in the beginning of the summer. And we can see that there are only 478,000 of those unlocked, even with all of the era battles and all of the pushes for getting players into the pirates. But again, when we go back to Stormtrooper Luke, as of today, there are 578,000 of them. But when we go over to IG90, there are only 500,000 of them, right? And we kind of go, hey, man, that's a drop off. That's a big drop off of 78,000 players, which is a far cry from the 100,000 that Arnold is suggesting. And the thing that we have to really remember here is time, right? There is time between each marquee, and there is time for players to get them and invest in them. And while I do understand that on day one of this new era, everybody unlocked Stormtrooper Luke literally immediately, that wasn't the case for IG90 or for Buddy Cop Chewbacca, in that you actually did need to interact with the era system in order for those characters to become unlocked. There was no splash screen that said, hey, click here, unlock this character. You had to go into Coliseum, or you had to go into the era marquee area in order for that to happen. In fact, there were a lot of Reddit posts, people confused, like, hey, how did they screw this up? Why can't I unlock my character? And everybody figured it out afterwards, after pretending they needed to restart the game, which wasn't exactly true. And I know that people are thinking, well, Egnards, everybody does do those things, so those things should be genuine. And I will point out that there are players, even in the old marquee system, that just would not do the era, the marquee battles at all. In fact, I know one of those players personally, Vanced, who just would not interact. And we have to remember that not every player playing this game is a highly engaged player, though as somebody watching a video, as somebody on Discord, as somebody who interacts with content creators, you probably don't realize that there are people outside of your situation. We will talk about that as well in a couple of minutes. What I do actually want to talk about instead is something that I have been tracking, and that is to say, I have been looking at the numbers for these characters on a day-to-day basis. Unfortunately, after Stormtrooper Luke came out, and that is to say here that each day those characters were unlocking pretty consistently. And if we look at the numbers that Arnold is actually looking at here, if I can do that without actually playing the video, let's go down. Let's scrub this a little bit. I guess we're going to have to do that.
Gear 13. Keep that in mind. So we're like in this gear 12 spot up there.
I think he said this was day one.
Because now.
No. Where are we? Back. Star distribution going all the way up. Okay, so 542,000. That was not day one. And again, Arnold did suggest and did actually say that those were the day one unlocks for Stormtrooper Luke. But I happen to have the numbers from 3 weeks after launch. So this was right after IG90 launched. And there was 513,000 unlocks of Stormtrooper Luke's on that day, and 8,841 7-star characters. Now that's 3 weeks after Stormtrooper Luke launched. On day 4 of IG90's marquee, somebody posted on Reddit, kind of giving the same idea of numbers and suggesting a supreme drop-off. And that is when I started to track these things to kind of see the growth of characters over time. When we look at IG90 as an example, we see that on the day 5, we have roughly 400,000 unlocks. But at the 3-week mark, we have 485,000 unlocks and 6,499 7-star. That is a drop off, but it is a much less significant drop off than is being suggested by other content creators, by Arnold, by other people around the community who are not realizing that time plays a factor. And again, we will address time a little bit later in this video to give you an idea of these releases. And I know that Arnold, and I give him kudos and applause for talking about this as well with Captain Silva, Forlam, and Zuckus. When we look at those numbers specifically, 93 days after Silvo is unlocked, we see 349,000 unlocks of him. 33 days after Zuckus, we see 337,000 unlocks of him. When we go to these marquees, we're seeing unlocks at the 485,000 to 513,000 amounts, which is considerably more and a much smaller degree of shrinkage. Said shrinkage than is being suggested. Now, I also have here Buddy Cop Chewbacca. I know that this says IG90 here. I just haven't changed that because that marquee hasn't come out yet. But when we look at Buddy Cop Chewbacca, whose marquee has just finished, we see, and I skipped the 72-hour day because I forgot about it, so we're keeping that blank, that on day 1, we had 136,000 unlocks. By day 7, we had 436,000 unlocks. We are not at week 3 yet, so we do not have a week 3 number, but we are seeing roughly 25,000 more people have unlocked Buddy Cop Chewbacca at the end of his marquee than unlocked IG90, so we are seeing growth there. And even though we look at this 8,841 for Stormtrooper Luke, we see a drop off to 6,499 with IG90. At the 1-week mark, we see 6,898 for Buddy Cop Chewbacca, which shows us that Chewbacca and Yoda together make a beautiful pair, but that we are seeing growth in the player market. Now, again, I would be remiss to not say that I recognize IG90 as probably not a super recognizable character compared to Buddy Cop Chewbacca, which is 2 of the most recognizable Star Wars characters there are. So will we see that same growth or at least consistency over the next 3 marquees, who again right now are left blank on my screen? Who knows, right? But what I am going to say is that I understand that time does play a factor when it comes to unlocks. Now, why does time play a factor? It's actually very simple. And there's a couple of things. Number one, this is all happening around the holidays, right? And even in my guild, there are people who are not playing every day. I'm in an almost 700 million guild. This all started around Thanksgiving. We're now going into Christmas and New Year's. People are spending time with their families. They're not popping into the game every single day as much as I normally would want them to. Number two, not all players are everyday players. There are plenty of players down in the casual area who are playing every day, sort of 6 times a week, 5 times a week, only when they remember to. Not everybody is as highly engaged, and not everybody has ever been as highly engaged. We like to, again, pretend that that is the case with players that kind of play consistently like we do, but there's a whole market of players who are not who don't care about the end game, who don't care about their Galactic Legends, who just kind of want to play their poop game for 10 minutes whenever they're at work and they happen to remember this instead of doing their Sudoku. The other thing that we have to keep in mind is players making alternate accounts. Anytime there is a major content release, players are going to make alternate accounts to kind of see what the new game experience is like. I know that many content creators have done that, though that does represent a very small minority. But I also know that there are a lot of just regular players, even on my Discord community, who have popped in, tried the new game out. Maybe they wanted to start a free-to-play alt. Maybe they just wanted to see the new game experience. But those players typically are going to see a pretty significant drop-off because they're not interested in playing another account long term. They just kind of want to see what those things look like. And then the other really important thing to keep in mind is that advertising tract that CG brought us on right around the start of this era. They pushed ads on YouTube, they pushed ads on Facebook, they pushed ads on Instagram, and not those really crappy ads that they were putting out a year ago or 2 years ago, but like high quality, really big, really, hey, we want players this playing this game types of ads. And that accounts for a huge increase in player base. But one thing that really needs to be kept in mind is just in the mobile game market in general is that players drop off. In fact, I found this study this morning that has to do with app stores and games and apps when it comes to the mobile space, and it tells me right here that based on downloads and deletions, and based on actually interacting with an app, that we see only a 35.7% retention for games on day one for iOS and 27.5% on Android. This is not Star Wars Galaxy Heroes. This is just mobile in general for mobile gaming. By day 30, iOS has a 5% retention rate to Android's 2.6% retention rate. So what exactly does that mean? That essentially means that a lot of the players that we saw come in on Stormtrooper Luke day one, they never had any intention of playing this game long term. They're not part of the metric of whether or not players have quit Star Wars Galaxy of Hero. They're just the typical mobile gaming nerds who pick up a game, try it once, they go, oh, this is kind of cool, and then they forget about it, and then they delete it in a month when they look at their screen, they realize that they're out of space for their cat photos and they need to delete something that they're not currently using. Again, that's the entire mobile game retention space. And when we look at a 30-day drop off to 2.6 to 5%, that kind of explains a lot of the drop off that we look at between Stormtrooper Luke and IG-90, and that drop off again is not anywhere near as big as is suggested. Now, if we look at today's numbers, Stormtrooper Luke is at 578,000 unlocks. Okay, so that's considerably higher than we were talking about before with 545,000, and we are looking at IG-90 having 500,000 unlocks, so it's about 78,000 lower than Stormtrooper Luke, but also with 2 weeks less of time in game. When we look at that star distribution down here, 7 stars for Stormtrooper Luke, we're still seeing growth, but obviously it's always slower after that marquee era. 9,100 from, I think it's 8,900. 8,800, and then IG-90 6,400 drops down to 6,500. So we kind of see after around that 3-week mark, there tends to be a pretty significant dip. And that makes sense because there's really not many great ways to acquire those shards at that point. Anyway, the point here is to say that when we look at numbers and when we talk about numbers, we have to think about all of the avenues that are kind of going on. We can look at the growth on other characters. Captain Athano, there's 478,000 of them currently in game. And 47,000 players have him at 7 stars. Quickled was the next marquee right after Athano. We see 425,000 players have him. So that is a drop off of about 53,000 players. And we look at that gear distribution, that star distribution, we see 37,000 at 7 star versus the 47,000 at 7 star for Athano. When we drop down to Kix, who is the third marquee, we are looking at 407,000, dropped down from 425,000, dropped down from 478,000. And when we look at that 7 star, there's actually more than Quiggled, which is kind of surprising, but is sort of the same jump that we see with Buddy Cop Chewbacca versus IG-90. All right, so that all of that is to say that these kinds of drop-offs are relatively normal with characters. It is nothing crazy. It is nothing really that interesting from a player perspective. The overall player base has increased, and more importantly, when we look at numbers like this and we say, hey, let me show it to you on the screen. And we say, hey, wait a second, there are 8,841 Stormtrooper Lukes. There are 6,499 IG-90s. There are 6,898 Buddy Cop Chewbaccas. We also have to ask ourselves, wait a second, how does this compare to a pre-Coliseum era where characters are getting to 7-star almost immediately? Now, unfortunately, I don't have clear-cut numbers on that. I have no way of going back and saying, hey, wait a second, let's look at the numbers for 1 week after unlock or 3 weeks after unlock to see what that is like. But I can tell you, at least from my experience of not necessarily tracking those things, but being curious and clicking in on those things to see what a character has been unlocked, what the 7-star unlock rate is that it's typically somewhere between 2,000 to 4,000 accounts. And that essentially means, and while this is anecdotal, just because, or I should say theoretical, just because I don't have the numbers to prove that, it does look like there is growth in the number of players who are invested in bringing characters to 7-star. Now, again, as we finish this up, I do want to remind everybody, right now I am very negative on this era. Right now, it does not. I would not blame players for quitting. I've seen players quit. I've talked to players who have quit. I have talked to players who are really close to quitting. And I would say, hey, I get it. The one thing that I am annoyed about here, of course, is really just using data in a way that is misleading to talk about something in a clickbaity way. In order to drive an argument that does not currently exist. And I will tell CG, hey, listen, you need to do better. Like, damn right, yes, you do. And I'm really hoping that after the holidays, we will see them do better. But I also believe that as content creators, we also need to make sure that the information that we are putting out is not just technically accurate, but is actually accurate and talks about all of the reasons that something might be occurring so that we're not alarmists just to get clicks, which ironically is a big criticism that the same person has made against other content creators in the very, very, very recent present/past. Now, with that all said, feel free to flame me in the comments. Tell me I'm wrong. Screw me over. Tell me you hate me because Arnold is your one true God. Again, I'm just here to give you the information. I'm just here to tell you things accurately. And I am tired of people making clickbait just to feed the hordes for no legitimate reason. So I hope you take that for what it is. And I honestly hope that you don't see this as an attack as Arnold T, because I've had a couple of conversations with him in the past, and I do believe that he is a very, very smart man and a very articulate person when he chooses and wants to be one. He has been very kind to me in the past as well, going so far as to buy me a Relic 9 Marin, or I should say a 7-star Marin when Marin first came out. And he spent a lot of time talking me up through my Reddit stuff early on and using that as part of his content, which should give me some degree of legitimacy, I think. But that doesn't mean that he is immune to being called out for saying things that don't paint an accurate picture of what is going on right now in the game. All of that is to say, I hope you found this helpful. I hope you take this the way that it is intended to be. I hope you understand that my goal here is to inform the player base. Peace out. Have a great rest of your day.